Good afternoon, Panugi and my friends. This afternoon, I would like to present about the association between TOEFL iBT test scores and the Common European Framework of Reference, or CEFR levels. Now, this one is not the common research that we have usually read about, but I'm going to try to explain what I understand about the article here. Now, the presentation today consists of 4 parts, basically. So the first one is the research objectives, in which it contains rationale for the revision of the CEFR cut score and claims. And the second one, we can put that one into a theoretical framework, in which it covers a brief overview of the CEFR and the process of mapping test scores to its levels. And then the third part is a research design, but I don't think I can call this one the common research design, but it is how the researchers conduct the study. And then the last one is the findings, in which it presents the evidence supporting the claims. Now, before I move on to research objective, so this article is actually a research memorandum in which it talks about the cut scores for CEFR and comparing it with the TOEFL iBT scores. Now, when we talk about scores on language tests for speakers of English as a second or foreign language, ESL or EFL, are often used to classify test takers into different categories or levels of proficiency. Now, however, a test score by itself does not indicate if the criterion has been met. One way to relate test scores to criteria is to map the test scores with the descriptions of levels of language proficiency. Now, the CEFR, in this case, can be a useful tool for informing decisions about levels of English language proficiency. While the TOEFL iBT test score mapping results to the CEFR levels might have been too rigorous, resulting in higher test scores than perhaps needed to reflect English skills described by the B2 level and other levels. Now, as we know that there are 6 levels in the CEFR, ranging from the lowest is A1 up to the highest is C2. Now, this research memorandum, as I mentioned, presents the rationale for the revision of the CEFR cut scores and offer validity evidence supporting claims related to the cut scores. So instead of having an experimental research, this particular research memorandum displays or conveys other things or portrays other things, like uncommonly what we have known or read usually. Now, the claims related to the interferences. So the first one, claim 1, it is about the reasonableness of the cut scores. The revised CEFR cut scores are reasonable for making decisions about admissions into higher education. So there is this kind of issue in which when the CEFR scores is cut and it is compared to the TOEFL iBT or any other admission test for higher education, that these kind of decisions will put negative impact on the admissions of students into higher education. And the second claim, that the revised CEFR cut scores do not negatively impact admissions decisions due to classification errors. Now, there are 2 claims here in which this research memorandum is about to support or to show that the claims are not valid, also with the provided evidence. Now, the theoretical framework, in short, there are 3 things mentioned before the discussion in this article. So there are the brief overview of the CEFR and process of mapping test scores to its levels. The first one is mapping test scores to the CEFR. Now, according to the Council of Europe in 2001, a common framework for learning, teaching, and assessment is desirable to promote and facilitate cooperation among educational institutions in different countries, and that it provides a sound basis for the mutual recognition of language qualifications. And the third one is to assist learners, teachers, course designers, and examining bodies and educational administrators in situating and coordinating their efforts. Now, the proficiency scales of the CEFR offer a comprehensive description of the objectives that learners can expect to achieve at different levels of language proficiency. As I mentioned earlier, there are 6 levels there, from A1 up to C2, in which the comprising statements called as descriptors to describe what learners can do when using the language. Now, instead of providing with what learners can do or what they cannot do, these descriptors positively convey what the learners in that certain category or level is able to do, specific skills or proficient in which level. Now, the second one is mapping TOEFL iBT test scores to the CEFR. This one is based on a study by Tenenbaum and Wiley 2008 on mapping English language test score to the CEFR, in which it employed 2 standard setting methods, a modified angle approach, and for selected response items, and a performance profile approach for constructed response items. The primary outcome for this study was a set of recommended cut scores, in which the minimum test scores that the educators on average just to be needed to enter different CEFR levels. So there's this kind of issues in which the CEFR levels is too high, in which it results in the difficulties of students entering high school, or in higher educations like universities, like our stuffs. And then one relevant source of information that can be used to adjust cut scores in a principled way is the error of measurement associated with the test scores. And then the standard error of measurement quantifies how consistent test scores are. Later, the ETS reviewed the panel recommended cut scores on the 4 test sections, and in 2014, they lowered those recommendations by 2 SEM, in which the total minimum score corresponding to B1 is now 42 scale points, down from 57 scale points. And then the total minimum score to enter B2 is now 72 scale points, down from 87 scale points. And for C1, it is now 95 scale points, down from 110 scale points, which means when students are scored initially for 110 for C1, now they can get this level for C1 only within 95 scale points. Now the third one is the alignment of the content of the TOEFL iBT test to the CEFR levels. Relevant issue regarding CEFR-based score interpretations is the extent to which the content of a test is aligned with the language ability described in the CEFR. Without satisfactory content alignment, as Tenenbaum and Cho in 2014 pointed out, there is little justification for conducting a standard setting study, as the test would lack content-based validity. And then the connection between the content of the TOEFL iBT test and the CEFR level descriptors is evident in both the CEFR and the TOEFL iBT test value in terms of describing English language proficiency. Now, the research design, what I figure out from this article is that this is non-experimental, of course, and that these researchers is using past studies or recent studies, and that the researchers also use this or apply this argument-based approach proposed by Kane in 2016, and that it is through the use of external non-assessment criteria. For the findings, now the investigation of university admission requirements for TOEFL iBT test scores in English-speaking countries. So according to, now This one is taken from a research initially to check the admission web pages of 155 top-ranked universities, in which it is based on the 2014 to 2015 Times Higher Education World University Rankings. So first of all, the researchers tried to figure out or to check the admission requirements for TOEFL iBT test scores in English-speaking countries. So this one is basically taken during the initial process of students admitting to universities. The CEFR P2 level descriptors are relevant as language objectives for further and higher education. And then additional analysis of the score requirements to obtain further insights into the reasonableness of the revised cut score range mapped to the P2 level of the CEFR by comparing that range to the recommended cut scores was conducted. So this one, the initial recommended or the original scores for P2 is used, and then the cut scores is also used, and then they are compared which one in which it is relevant or which is reasonable or not. And then the revised TOEFL IPT test score range for P2 seems to better capture the current practice in university entry requirements among the survey institutions. Thus, the analysis provides some backing for the reasonableness of the revised CEFR cut scores. The second claim, investigating the impact of the revised cut scores. To investigate the impact of the revised CEFR cut scores, the researchers utilized the data from the two previous studies that investigate the relationship between IPT scores and a grade point average. While Cho and Bridgman in 2012 analyzed the TOEFL IPT test scores and the cumulative grade point average or GPA of 2.594 international students or 2,594 international students, in which they are from 1,850 graduates and 744 undergraduates from 10 universities in the US. Now, Bridgman et al. In press analyzed the TOEFL IPT test scores and the overall GPA from the first three terms of 787 undergraduate international students in one university in the US as well. The study shows that the TOEFL IPT test scores categories were the revised score range mapped to the P2 level of the CEFR, ranging from 72 up to 94, and that the original range of P2 scores proposed by Tenenbaum and Wiley 2008. Later on, the GPA categories were defined based on the following rationale, in which below 2.6, meaning that the scores typically associated with B minus or below, and then 2.6 to 3.6, the scores typically associated with B, and above 3.6, these scores typically associated with A or A minus. So the studies by Cho and Bridgman 2012 and Bridgman et al. In press clearly show that the TOEFL IPT test scores have a meaningful relationship with academic performance as indicated by the GPA. The results suggest that using the revised score range for CEFR level P2 will not likely result in admitting university students who do not have sufficient English language skills to cope with instructional demands in the English language. So this one is the evidence in which in the beginning the university or the higher education have this kind of concerns in which lowering the P2 level scores or cutting the scores will impact on having or admitting lower proficient students in English. However, from these studies, it is claimed and it is supported by having the evidence that it does not impact negatively. And then the education professionals and researchers advocate adaptation of the CEFR to meet local needs. Because the CEFR is a dynamic rather than fixed framework, consequently, it is appropriate to periodically review and reconsider the relationship between test scores and the CEFR in light of changes in decision makers' needs and changing assessment contexts. as it is demonstrated in this research memorandum because cut scores are constructed, not found. This is according to Zeki 2001, page 45. So in short, from this study and the two claims proposed earlier, it is evident that cutting score for P2 level does not impact or negatively impact on the admission of students to higher education, and that the cutting of the scores for P2 or the CEFR in overall is necessary and that it is reasonable. And to bear in mind that the CEFR descriptors and also the framework or the standardized framework is what is that? It is not based on one specific context, but it is usable for any kinds of context. I think that's all from me. Thank you very much, and God bless you.